game is a sport for choice. Whether it's action, RPG, racing, horror, indie, simulators, AAA, multiplayer, single-player, casual, shovelware, mobile, and VR, the overwhelming list of titles to be played, let alone touched, is getting exceedingly larger, which is why it took me until 2023 to finally play Deathloop, and it was a game I thoroughly enjoyed. Fans of the developer Arcane will quickly identify the similarities between Deathloop and their previous titles, going so far as to repurpose abilities from the Dishonored series, a decision that, while it may be considered lazy, is understandable, as it has allowed the developers to apply a greater level of attention to core combat and gameplay structure, with the latter being what separates Deathloop from Arcane's earlier output. As a result, failure prompts players to engage with the game's mechanics and carefully plan a route in order to maximize efficiency, and the satisfaction that comes from successfully assassinating a visionary is what makes the process of studying their movements, collecting trinkets, and exploring the world meaningful. And while the game ultimately has to direct call to locations based off the intel you collect to maintain story cohesion, how you go about completing your objective is entirely in the player's control, as the game accepts whatever options are feasible within its sandbox, coupled with a relatively average story, and I found myself compelled to play for hours on end over the course of 3 days to reach the end credits. And while it was enjoyable, it's not something I could be encouraged to revisit anytime soon. But it did leave an impression on me, and not in the way I had expected. Now, fast forward to 2025, and another game has absorbed my time in a similar fashion, which is odd because what I'm about to say may paint a different picture, so bear with me. We Happy Few is unremarkable, to say the least. Gameplay is reminiscent of doing chores as you run around this colourful yet barren map doing the gameplay equivalent of grocery shopping for yourself and other people. Combat is somewhat serviceable and the stealth is severely lacking in any depth or complexity. It's the closest thing to a poor man's Far Cry I've ever played. On paper, these games couldn't be more different in design, budget, and production value. Yet to each game's credit, in spite of their faults, they can be recognised as better than the sum of their parts, because their best qualities aren't hamstrung by their worst. Deathloop's story is underdeveloped and lacking in emotional impact, and goes so far as to relegate the responsibility of the game's twist to a piece of intel. And while the story leaves much to be desired, it doesn't detract from the strength in its core gameplay. And We Happy Few's story, while certainly not perfect, is able to quickly absorb the play and the immediate drama with animations and dialogue that is rare to see in an indie title. First-person storytelling has always been a struggle for even AAA developers, which makes what Compulsion Games have achieved here impressive to say the least. Everything from characters interacting with the environment to how well the emotions of each character are captured almost makes up for the marathon run required to get to each waypoint. I've played games with better stories, action, music, characters, and impact. Heck, we have all probably played better games, but I doubt I am the only one who has felt a similar way about 2, 3, 4, 5, or even more games that occupy this space in the industry. The games which are undermined because its quality is measured up against the expectations set by its genre, developer, or budget, regardless of the circumstances behind a game's creation. Games can't be the best at everything, but the irony here is that the title of Best Narrative, Best Score, Best Art Direction, Best Indie, and Game of the Year implies that this space in particular can't be occupied by anyone else, while also putting pressure on these acclaimed games to perform in this single or multiple areas to a standard that could be considered unreasonable, not to mention the connotations that come from being listed as anything but one of the greats. It's not exactly fair. Black Myth Wukong isn't somehow worse than Astrobot because it didn't win Game of the Year. Liza P's art and sound design isn't diminished because Elden Ring exists, and Indica's story can still compel even if it's not genre defining. This isn't to say that game shows and expos don't have their place, they most certainly do, but my concern lies with the perception that these leaderboards only serve to highlight the games that are guaranteed to be worth your time and money. And for those who lack the hours in the day and the disposable income to spend each year, picking from a short list of the best rather than taking a gamble at a massive list is, categorically speaking, the most efficient way to experience the most polished games on offer. And as games aren't exactly getting cheaper, it's understandable why someone would prefer a list curated by professional critics. But I believe that to be all the more reason to explore beyond what the majority believe to be the purest experience. And in the age of Game Passes, demos, frequent sales, and refund periods, the freedom to engage before committing to a fixed price is all the more reason to indulge. It might not be a God of War, Elden Ring, or a Last of Us, but it might be a Ghost Runner, Dying Light, No Man's Sky, Metro Last Light, or Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for the quality of bad games, unfinished games, or uninspired games, nor am I trying to set a precedent to ignore genuine or objective criticisms. What I'm saying is that the force behind the games we play should be our own interests, curiosity, and intrigue, not at the mercy of what others declare to be the best, because that standard isn't a requirement for gameplay to engage, stories to impact, and artistry to amaze. I don't plan on playing Deathloop nor We Happy Few in the future, but for the time they are fresh in my mind, I'll remember them fondly, in the hope that I will find something just as, but hopefully more memorable, to occupy my time.